Well, this is a really, I'm so excited that we could do this this next session because it has a personal connection to me. I'm actually going to be featured in this film portion you're going to be seeing because I played in this very building. Let's, everybody, we could have your attention, please. But also because of the person who's going to be doing the presentation and her guest, in particular Kristin Ojaniemi, the filmmaker who made the film and is working on this project. I've had the great pleasure of knowing Kristin for several years and the projects she has worked on, the many films she has made. She is taking up the mantle that Michael Lokinen started in the late 1970s, making films about Finnish culture, even though her films have been beyond Finnish culture, but she's covering much of the same, really going into the next level, and I think it's just fantastic. She's a freelance photographer or videographer and editor for all types of video projects, an award-winning documentary filmmaker who is passionate about storytelling, cinematography, and everything video. She is currently, very excitingly, is going to be the head producer for the show Discovering on WLUC TV 6 that was announced in September. Congratulations. Taking on the mantle of the great Buck Levasseur, who started that all so many years ago. She's been an adjunct instructor at Nicolet College in Rhinelander and worked for WJFW in Rhinelander. And is educated at Grand Valley State in communications, film, and video production, and at Gilgit Community College. And she's going to be joined today by the gentleman who owns this structure, the former Ewen-Trout Creek High School, and his name is Gary Force. He's a member of the 1972 state champion basketball, Class D state champion basketball team from Ewen-Trout Creek. And but you're going to learn more about all that. So, Kristin, take it over.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you all for coming here today. Today we've seen a lot of barns, and now we're going to talk about a different type of barn, the gymnasium at Ewen-Trout Creek High School. I went to school here, and as he's mentioned, I'm a filmmaker, and so it was a story that I wanted to share with everyone, mainly because we're talking about heritage preservation today. My main interest in doing this story was actually the fact that Gary owns this building, and that the gym that Ewen-Trout Creek played basketball in for 46 years is still preserved pretty much as it once was, and what he has done with the building. So I started a documentary series at the beginning of this year titled Born in the Barn, and I'm going to start off by showing you part one, which is really focused on the fact that this gymnasium is still there, still preserved, and what Gary has done with it. So I'm going to jump out of this. And
this place, I can't imagine any team wanting to come here for a couple reasons. It's so small, and you got all those people on top of you, and we always, kicked their ass when they came here, so.
I believe Harry Rizzi, the announcer for the Ironwood radio station, gave it the name The Barn.
Besson passes into the corner. Shot up and good. By number 20, Brian Bessanen.
Well, we knew we had to come out running and gunning because that's what we've done all year, and that's how our game fell together.
You don't look forward to the games that are easy wins. You want to work hard.
Ewen-Trout Creek's had some great teams, great athletes.
If you can point your finger on that western end of the UP where there's not a lot of towns, that's us.
It's 77-36. The Panthers in command of this one.
The last game in the barn, 1998.
The last time the Ewen-Trout Creek Panthers found themselves playing in the state title game was 1982, and 40 years later, the 2022 Panther squad can now add their name to that list.
My name is Gary Forrest, graduated in 1972. Well, I actually bought it. My boys were in high school, so I mainly bought it for them for a place to come and play basketball. And of course, kind of use it as my own personal training facility. I should use it more, but it's worked out pretty well. And of course, I get to be my own janitor. I like a squeaky floor. We can hear the tenny squeak, then you know you're in a gym. I did have a favorite shot. It was a deep corner. And in college, I liked to hang around in that deep corner a lot too. It was a real natural shot for me. A lot of people have trouble shooting from the corner, but I thought it was my favorite spot on the floor.
You know, I came in the door, it smells the same as it did back in the 80s when I was here.
Oh, it's a special place. It smells the same still.
I will say it doesn't smell great, but it smells like the barn.
I remember the smell of varnish, and it was so hot. You know, those first 2 weeks of practice, it was lots of running, sprints. Always had a garbage can handy for the occasional person that needed to throw up.
35 years of moments. I had one game where it was raining. It was a torrential downpour outside, and it was raining so hard that as the teams went down the floor, my managers had to run out and wipe down the floor where it was leaking. They would run and watch the game to make sure they'd get out of the way when the game came back the other way. You know, by the end of that game, those poor managers were exhausted. But a lot of great memories. A lot of great memories here, a lot of friends that we had that we don't have anymore. But this place was home. It was home.
It's impressive. I'm so glad Gary's got this and just keeps it up, because it's more or less a community court. That's sort of how he runs it.
Winter, summer, it's heated, you can go there whenever. So playing at the barn was just what I did, especially over quarantine. The boys and all of us got some games going in there.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with tradition. Once you get the tradition going, the younger kids pick up that basketball and play a lot. Of course, access to facilities to play means a lot. When I was younger, we were able to get in here, you know, off school hours a lot of times and play. I know a lot of neighboring communities' gyms were not open.
We would come in late at night and just shoot and shoot and shoot.
This is where I came with my sisters when they were in high school, and I got to shoot at the side rims while they were practicing.
I remember when I was a freshman, our coach Tom Cottle said, if you guys could win some games, you know, if we can start playing well, people will come out of the woodwork to watch us play. And boy, was he right.
You could only fit 300 or something in here. That stage would be full of the high school kids going nuts. If people would be in the hallway, they'd be standing outside the door. So-and-so got a basket, so-and-so got a basket. They'd pass it down, you know. Those were fun days.
Coming out of the tunnel and seeing all the fans and stuff, this place was packed. This place was packed every night for a boys and a girls basketball game.
People who didn't go to school here talk about the barn and how it was just electric.
If you're an opponent here, it is intimidating. You know, the feet of the fans are right out on the floor. Some of the ones, if they didn't like your team, they weren't really moving those feet either.
They were right on top of you. And so when you were doing an inbound pass, I mean, you had very little space to actually do it. And in addition to the fact that the teams from Ewen were always just so amazing and hard to keep up with in general.
You know, the stage, you put a bunch of crazy high school kids on that stage, and
Trying to make a free throw for the opponents was a tough gig because the fans were right behind that free throw line and just hollering and wailing.
Raise the stand right over there or over in that spot and yell at you when you got out of hand. You know, if you were here cheering.
I'm standing against the wall over there. That was my spot. Within a year's time, we had 2 state championships, 1 boys, 1 girls. I don't think that's been done before, but I was beginning to wonder what I had walked into with all these Stone State trips and championships, and if we're gonna have to build a bigger trophy case or something.
1973, that was the first year of a state championship for girls basketball. That year, Ewen won it.
What I remember is when we won that game, I could hear people in the crowd jeering about these Hicks from up north coming down and taking that trophy up there. They were so upset.
Ewen-Trout Creek is the 1972 Class D champions, defeating Flint Ole Rosary by a score of 74-62.
We thought we could win it all. We had great athletes on our team, and they knew how to play the game. We were great shooters, played fast. And of course, this is our 72 Class D articles here that Diane Hart's made up. Tom Izzo played against Tom in college. He was at Northern Michigan. I was at Lake Superior State. And this, of course, is the 82 team. Dave Bessinen, of course, was their star. You know, the legendary Bessinen family. The undefeated team in 2008 with my son Kristin and All-Stater Chase Leskola. Of course, they got beat in the quarterfinal, but real nice team. A couple of my other boys here, Dustin, of course, they had a real good team also, but they got upset by Crystal Falls. Son Kelsey was on the All-State team there, 2001, I believe. Well, Ewen-Trout Creek's been pretty fortunate to have 2 Mr. UP basketballs. You know, Jake Witt, 2017-18, and then, of course, 2022 with Jaden Borseth.
Borseth strong to the hole, and 1 coming.
All the new light-colored ones that aren't faded yet with the 2022 team. And then, of course, I did see all of the tournament games. This team played very well in most of those games, just dominated the other teams a lot of times, but they were a very athletic team and some real good basketball players.
They grew up knowing basketball, knowing that the sport was cherished around here. And it's just, you know, I think it's in their blood.
the tradition ran so deep that it's, you know, it's 2 generations back, it's 3 generations back, and
oh boy, there's so many coincidences, you know.
And now, let's meet the starting lineups for today's final game.
Okay, the big star, the UP Player of the Year, his dad was my starting center on my undefeated 95 team. You take Kelsey Jillick, his dad was a good starter on my 92 team. Caden Bessinen, of course, he was on the bench, while his dad is Dave Bessinen, the big star from 82. Brandon Pokey, his dad, the assistant coach, was my starting center in 90 and 91.
We're a small school. There's no way we should be one of the best winning programs in UP history, but we are. I think that's a big thing. It's that work ethic, that grit that all the players, all the people in the community, everybody has.
But really, you know, you think about the barn and what that means to all ETC students, it's a pretty special place. Everything happened here, right? This is where school dances were, this is where prom was, this is where assemblies were. And I don't think anybody can ever forget, you know, like as a 7th grader, you know, you're sitting over here on this side, and the whole rest of the school is sitting on the other side, and the school looks at the new Rugrats. I mean, that was our first interaction with the barn, really.
Like, that's part of what bleeds into the whole basketball thing, is like, this is your place, this is your, it's undeniably yours, you know? And then when you come play on it.
You look at most of the schools in the outlying areas that have closed, they're just falling down. And Gary has been nice enough to, you know, put money in and keep putting money in.
So I'm a better filmmaker than I am a speaker, a public speaker. But so that's part one, as seen there. Part two will be about the 1972 season. So when I started this, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I knew I wanted to tell the story of this barn and Ewan's winning tradition growing up in this school district. You're a Panther, and I mean, basketball is, you know, pretty much everything there. And so I knew there was a story I wanted to tell, and I knew I'm really big into anniversaries, and it was 50th anniversary of the 1972 boys state championship. So I had contacted the school about doing a film and asked if I could film the rest of that season and just get a little bit of extra video to help, you know, tell the story of Panther basketball history. And I kind of feel bad that I didn't know how good they were. So filming the end of the season ended up, I was downstate in Lansing filming the state final game. So I followed them throughout the tournament season there. And then I still wasn't sure what I was going to do with this, and decided I wanted to film the interviews inside the barn, and ended up doing about, how do I go here? 22 individual interviews, 4 team interviews. And after doing all those interviews and hearing all these stories, many of which I knew but really didn't know, and so many different ways to do it, I decided to make it an 8-part series, which you just saw part 1 there. So really, this 8-part series is going to tell the story of Ewen-Trout Creek basketball history, but it's really more about, you know, the community that supports this team, and, you know, how much basketball is important to this community and what really brings this community together as well. Also tells a little bit about the school history and really UP history. I mean, basketball is a really big part of all schools in the UP. There's really great basketball traditions throughout the UP. I was actually just talking to a gentleman who, not, you know, the most positive light, but he's writing a book about the 42-game losing streak in Bessemer in the 1960s. So there is an interest in basketball history, you know, really in how that, you know, how the UP enjoys their basketball. So we just seen part 1 there. And some other, you know, like I said, Ewan's got a winning tradition. Just want to throw some stats at you, you know. I'm going to throw a lot of stats and go through a lot of years, but, you know, we're telling the story of what happened inside those walls of that building, that barn. And there's a lot of coincidences throughout the stories that will be shared in this documentary series. But one I liked is in these 50 years, how identical the girls and the boys have been. District championships, 19 for girls, districts, 21 for boys. 7 regional championships for girls, 5 for the boys. Both had 2 state runner-ups. each had a state championship, and losing seasons in 50 years for each aren't too many. 7 for the girls and 8 for the boys in those 50 years. So the barn was actually built in 1951. I found that out yesterday. I had to go to the local library. I wasn't sure. So they broke ground in August of 1951 on the barn. Originally they played basketball in a gymnasium that was located inside the main school building, which when I went to school was the shop room. It was converted into the shop room after they built the new gymnasium. This was built by a local company, the Sierran Brothers Contracting of Ewen, by Reno, Eli, and Alex. They were the brothers that owned Sierran Brothers Contracting, and their sons Jack and Raymond. The architect was Harry Gelstein of Menominee, which I had to really zoom in on that one picture on the top left to try to make out the letters and then type them into Google and eventually figure it out. But some really interesting photos of the barn starting to be constructed there. You can kind of see the arches there in that middle photo as they're going up. It says built in the fall of 1951. It cost $85,000 to build it back then. And the newspaper article actually said it has 600 person seating capacity, which I can't believe you can fit 600 people in there. It felt like it. But the floor was 75 by 45 feet. He said the architect Harry Gelstein of Menominee. And there's a couple pictures. Those were taken in the winter, I think. It said after the first basketball season that was played in there was 1952. I like that bottom photo, the large windows that you see there, which I think those ended up being covered up within like 20 years. I'm not sure why. I mean, I can see how they might be difficult for basketball games or for heating the barn there. But eventually those were covered up. Well, we'll go back a little bit before. So the community that we're talking about is the school district is Ewen-Trout Creek in southern Ontonagon County, if you're not familiar. It's a very rural area. Before there was ETC Panthers, that was the mascot. There were 2 basketball powerhouses, the Ewen Bulldogs and the Trout Creek Anglers. So there were schools in both Ewen and Trout Creek. The Ewen Bulldogs, and they both had they had some great basketball programs each between them before they ended up consolidating. But the Ewen Bulldogs were the UP Class D title in 1940, Class D state runner-up in 1967, and that's the 1967 photo there at the bottom left. Then the Trout Creek Anglers, which probably have the most state championships, and back in the 1932 to 1947, there were actually separate state tournaments for the Upper Peninsula and the Lower Peninsula, but each were deemed state champions. So like the UP Class D title, 1935, 1937, and the Class E state title, 1955, 56, and 58, they were just competing against UP teams. They had a state title, but it was just in the UP. There was no Class A schools actually in the UP either. Then they had a Class D state runner-up, and that was actually a statewide Lower Peninsula and Upper Peninsula in 1966. A couple notable names that came out of the area that did play basketball out of the Trout Creek Anglers was Jim Manning. He played for Ewen from 1957 to 1961. He did have a point-scoring record for many years, 2,137 points. And his claim to fame is he was a pitcher for the Minnesota Twins for a couple of years. Another Trout Creek angler was Bob Gale. He went to Michigan State from 68 to 70, but he was on that 1966 state runner-up team out of Trout Creek, and also UP Sports Hall of Famer. The schools consolidated in 1968, I believe it was. And I like this. I found this in the yearbook. It's like a picture, and they are all showing their little community names. Like I said, I live in Paynesville. I didn't shout that out earlier during the barn presentation. And the girl that gets cut off on the far left, her sign said Trout Creek. But these are all the communities that ended up consolidating when Ewen and Trout Creek became one school. And when they did that, the high school was grades 7 through 12, but the elementary schools were in Trout Creek. The Trout Creek stayed an elementary school. No, I also like this photo. So going into the 1972, I found this photo in the 1968 yearbook, and future varsity champs already. So they knew just when this team was in junior high that they were going to be future champions in 1972. So you see Gary Forrest there in the bottom, and some of his other teammates there. So part 2 of the film series will be what I'm calling Small Town to State Champs. They had an undefeated season of 26-0. They averaged over 90 points per game. Said they were the state champions, defeating Flint Holy Rosary by a score of 74-62. And their coach was Rudy Perhala. I'm going to list off a lot of stats just to kind of get through this fast. When I was doing these interviews, I got a lot of great stories. One of my favorites was how the assistant coach now, Dave Polke, he had Rudy Perhala as a 6th grade teacher. And they watched the game many times. He kept playing that state championship game, the film, so much that he wore the film out, showing it to his classes. Some photos, the 1972 Class D state champs, and actually, like I said, it was their 50th anniversary, so at the local Log Jamboree Parade, they actually had a bus and had some photos of some classmates there as well. Part 3, girl power, exploring the 1973 and 1974 girls. As we said in the film there, they also won a state championship. Before Title IX, which happened in 1972, they only had conference tournaments. They didn't have a statewide basketball tournament for high school girls basketball. So the 1973-74 year was the first time there was a state level tournament for high school girls basketball, and Ewen-Trout Creek went down there Class D and won the championship. They defeated North Muskegon by a score of 57-48. And then actually again in the following year, they went back to the state and they were defeated when they were state runner-up the following season. And they also did have an undefeated season. Some stories, talking the ladies that I did interview from that team, they blew out everyone that they played. As you can see from the scores there, their highest scoring one was they were 100 to Lake Linden 23. Coach Nancy Osier, who came in a few years later, was actually coaching Bergland. That was her first year coaching Bergland, and Ewen beat Bergland a score of 67-29. And Nancy is the one that said that these girls, they knew the game. They were leaps and bounds ahead of any other girls basketball team in the area. And when I asked them where they learned to play basketball, going back to Barnes, they grew up on farms and they played, in their spare time, they played basketball. They had basketball hoops on the outside of barns or in the hay lofts, and that's where they learned to play basketball on the farm. So in those 72 boys and the 73 girls, a couple of them, Gary Forrest here, and Jamie Fleming, they both played for Lake Superior State University. When I showed this film before, people were curious about who ended up having college careers, and there's quite a few former Panthers that did have college careers, but here's a couple of them that both went to Lake Superior State University and had multiple records, each of them. Part 4, 1980s boys. So, like I said, I like anniversaries, and it's just really interesting that 1972, the boys went to the state final, and then in 1982, 10 years later, they also went to the state final game. They were defeated by Covert, so they were the state runner-up. They did, up until that point, have an undefeated season, and as we saw in the film, Dave Bessinen was kind of their all-star. Tons of photos and newspaper articles about him. And I've been going to TV6 as well, digging up video, and there's a lot of really great video from this season as well. That's in the archives there that I'm excited to use for this part of the series. Part 5, 1980s girls. It says, an ETC tradition, the girls of the 80s still can't be outdone. Like I said, the boys went to the state final, the girls went to the state final, the boys went to the state final, the girls went to the state final. It always seemed to happen in consecutive years like that. But the 80s were probably the best decade for the ETC girls. They had multiple really great seasons. 83, 84, they had an undefeated season. 84, 85, again undefeated. They were the Class D UP Team of the Year and #1 in the state. If I can think back in my notes, they got upset in the districts. They lost right away in the districts that year. 85, 86, they went down to the state final and they were the runner-up. 86, 87, they lost in the state semifinal. So they had a really, really good run of really great years there for the girls basketball program. And head coach was Nancy Osier. We'll talk about her a little bit here too. Part 6, the dynasty continues and the end of an era. Oh, I'm gonna go back to the 80s because I forgot something. Also in the 80s, what happened, I think it was 1985, Bergland consolidated with Ewen-Trout Creek. I never asked why Bergland didn't get their name in the school. Ewen-Trout Creek was pretty much covering most of the southern end of Ontonagon County then. And so that was in the 1985, I believe that was. And so then the elementary schools were located then in Bergland and in Trout Creek. And then the high school, like I said, in Ewen there. Part 6, the dynasty continues and the end of the era. So part 6 of the film series will focus on the 90s. I'm gonna kind of just glaze over that, but just a lot of more generations of Panther basketball players, many from the same families, from generation, from the 60s and 70s. A lot of great players came out of this decade, but there was a lot of really hard losses, a lot of losses in the districts and the regionals during these years. And the last game in the barn is played. So I graduated, I graduated from Ewen-Trout Creek in 2000, but I was on JV when Allison Bailey was on varsity. And so I, being kind of selfish in how I put this together, and they're my films, so I'll probably do a little bit of focus on Allison as well, because she was a basketball player that I definitely respected, an excellent basketball player. But she graduated from 1997. She had 2,131 points. She was a center, and she still holds the ETC scoring record. 1,357 rebounds, which I think is up there in the top rebounds for girls in the UP. She did play 4 years at Michigan Tech, is also the UP Sports Hall of Fame, and you did see her there in part 1 as well. So the last game in the barn was in 1998, and it was the boys basketball team versus Ontonagon, probably the biggest rivalry. I'm not sure if they picked that on purpose, but it was a full house in there. I think the newspaper article said it was the second largest crowd that was ever in that gym for that final game. And it was a potential barn burner. So when Ewen lost, they called it a barn burner, which wasn't very often. We did win that. Ewen won that, scored 91-66, so a pretty nice score there. Some of the photos there, the bottom left, Mitch Warchek, he actually scored the final basket in a game in the barn. And in the middle there's former players and coaches and cheerleaders that are holding up the banners from all the state championship and runner-up teams that got moved to the new school that was built. Top right, there's a tip-off, and I had to include myself in there once. I'm the cheerleader in the top left, standing, on people there, so I had to throw myself in there too. I was there. I don't really remember much about that game, but I know I was there. There's proof. So the last game in the barn, the Ewen-Trout Creek School District built a brand new school, and we moved into that in the fall of 1998. I don't know when they broke ground on it, but when Dan Truckee was showing pictures earlier about, taking these, we have these beautiful old buildings, and I love old schools. They just have such great architecture. They're just beautiful. And then we build a brand new school that is, would you say utilitarian? They just don't really have the same aesthetic. So I have to say, spending, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10th grade in this building, and then going to the new school. It was nice. It was new. You didn't have to wear a winter jacket, to class because it was warm. It didn't snow inside your classroom, which it had a tendency to do sometimes. But it just really didn't have that same atmosphere that the old school and that old gymnasium really had, that I was really hoping to capture with the documentary series, is that atmosphere and that feeling of being in that gym and watching a basketball game or playing on that floor. Part 7, the bench bosses. A large part of Ewen's winning history is their coaches. We had 2 of the winningest coaches in Michigan high school sports history, Nancy Ogier and Tom Cottle. And interviewing them, they were just amazing interviews, just from throwing stats out there to just really great memories of their times coaching at ETC. Nancy Ogier, list a few stats. She was the ETC girls varsity coach from 1979 to 2008. Previously, she had coached in Bergland starting in 1973. She had a total of 582 wins, 185 losses. The Class D state runner-up 1985. Winningest female coach in the UP. 3-time UP Class D Coach of the Year. The UP Sports Hall of Fame. Central Region Coach of the Year in 2000. Basketball Coaches Association of Michigan's Hall of Fame, just to name a few. So she was a really great coach. Not only was she coach, she was the physical education teacher, the health teacher. I'm sure she probably played even more roles in Ewen. Tom Cottle, he's the ETC boys varsity coach from 1978 to 2008. He actually did start in Ewen in 68, I believe. He was junior high or junior varsity coach for almost 10 years before he took over the varsity position. He had a total of 558 wins, 149 losses. 3-time UP Class D Coach of the Year and Class D state runner-up in 1982. His final game, you did actually see there was a small clip when Gary talked about his son playing, and there was a few passes. It was there's a quarterfinal game, and that was actually Tom Cottle's final game. And I have a video clip, and it's his face at the end of that game, and just it's slightly heartbreaking. Him knowing that was his final game coaching. But going back to Nancy Ogier, I had asked her when I interviewed her how many losing seasons that she had, and she didn't know, but she only had one. Her final one in 2008 was her only losing season, and that was actually the first year that girls basketball had moved to the winter. Previously, girls basketball had been played in the fall, and then for some reason they moved it to winter. 5 minutes? Oh, I'm going to bring Gary up here then. I didn't realize I went too long. But yes, Gary Forrs is here to talk about, why he bought the barn and what he has done with it.
This should be fine. Well, Kristin, great job with your presentation. And just have to say one thing. The consolidation, Ewen-Trout Creek consolidated in 1968. Well, 1966, Trout Creek was state runner-up, and 67, Ewen was state runner-up. So, the consolidation at that time just meant to be good basketball. The Ewen-Trout Creek built their new school in 98 and started in 99. Well, they put it up for sale for a while, and nobody really, any takers. I mean, the original building was built in 1915. So it's a pretty old structure. And I put word out to a few of the school board members. I said, well, I'll take that building off your hands if you want, but I don't really want to pay you anything for it. Well, that didn't go over very good. So they held on to it for 4 or 5 months, but then they had a steam pipe break because they were still heating it. And the school board had their meeting and decided, well, maybe we will get rid of it. They said, if you pay for the paperwork, we'll give you the school, just to get all the deeds transferred and so forth. So for a couple $1,000 or a little bit more it was, I ended up with a school. Well, I ended up with quite a headache, of course. When you have 12,000 square feet of roofs to take care of, I was a tar baby for quite a while. But one of the best things I ever did was put a new metal roof on the gym. And I have put some other roofs on and so forth. The building can't do too much with just because it takes a lot of funds if you want to accomplish something, and your return on investment probably isn't very good. The building itself was bare for many years, and I ended up cleaning out one of my son's bedrooms, and he had all these posters with the NBA players and college players and so forth. So I decided I'd put them up in the gym. And I started on one wall and had that complete. And then it came around, we had 4 or 5 boxes of the newspaper articles from all of my son's games, a lot of my games, and Ewen-Trout Creek basketball. So I decided to start putting a few up in the gym, and I got a little carried away and filled up all the walls. But it was a nice project to do, and you know, in the future, I have all the UP basketball teams usually on the wall, and hopefully we can continue doing that. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions for myself or Gary?
Any questions? No questions or comments? Yeah.
Great presentation. I grew up in the UP, so I remember what those teams were like. Why do you think you turned out the teams that you turned out over your history? I graduated from Bishop Baraga in Marquette, and they won a state championship in 1969. I, of course, was a great fan. I wasn't good enough to be the basketball players, but you know, time and time again, you just keep generating competitive teams. What do you think the reason for that?
Well, first of all, you need good athletes, which I believe Ewen-Trout Creek was very fortunate to have. But the tradition carries a long way, I think. And I do remember Marquette Bishop Baraga. In fact, the 1969, I remember Ewen-Trout Creek was rated #1 that year and got beat by Marquette Bishop Baraga up there. But I think that tradition carries a long way. The kids start playing basketball and keep playing to be, you know, like their elders, I think.
Nobody wants to be the losing season.
I think that's definitely true. Tradition breeds success. I was on a lot of bad teams because we just didn't have the tradition. My junior year, we had a really good team, and we beat you in Wakefield, and then you guys beat us in the barn, and that was a great season. See, in Wakefield, our gym was a lot bigger than yours.
Is the barn still standing, and do kids still play ball there?
Yes, they do. Yes, I usually, I need to keep it locked per insurance rules, but I usually keep the key outside of my house for the kids to pick up anytime that they want.
I had 3 sons who played basketball against Ewen-Trout Creek teams, 2 in the barn and then 1 in the new gym. And every time those guys got on the bus and were headed for Ewen-Trout Creek, they knew they were in for trouble, because the rumor in Lance was that all those kids from Ewen-Trout Creek ever did was shoot basketballs, and they proved it against us many, many times.
It's a true rumor.
Yeah, Maggie.
Did Michigan ever have girls half-court basketball, or did the girls always play full court?
I believe in the early 70s, before they did the full court, yes, there was the half court that first. It only lasted a year or two, though, I believe.
Yeah, the girls that you've seen there, 73, I think it was the early 70s they switched to the full court. Before there, they were playing full court, but they played like a 6-woman team, and had to stay on one side, and I don't know, it was really confusing sounding.
A lot of schools in the early 20th century had women's basketball. High schools in Northern had women's basketball. And then by the 1930s, and certainly by the 40s, they were all gone. I guess it wasn't proper for girls to play basketball anymore. And then it wasn't until the 70s, really, that it returned. And so, any other questions?
Just to add on that quick, one of my favorite stories that Ozier said was when she first started coaching in 73, and she told her girls they had to wear shorts, they cried.
Oh, geez.
They wanted to wear pants. They wanted to wear long pants on the court. They didn't want to wear shorts.
All right, well, thank you, Kristin and Gary, for coming and doing this. Wonderful. This is such a perfect example of community preservation, so just fantastic. Thank you. All right, we are going to take a few minutes. Our next presentation will be at 4:45. We have